This is CNN Breaking News.
Hello, everybody. I'm John Force. Thank you for being with us. And we begin with breaking news in the U.S. showdown with Iran. The New York Times reporting the United States president had approved military strikes on a number of Iranian targets, what's called a measured response, after an American drone was shot down. But that strike was abruptly called off. Here's part of the report from the New York Times. The operation was underway in its early stages when it was called off, a senior administration official said. Planes were in the air and ships were in position, but no missiles had been fired when word came to stand down, the official said. Earlier in the day, the U.S. military was making its case against Iran, releasing coordinates, which it says prove the American drone was over international waters when Iran shot it down. Tehran says the drone violated its airspace. CNN's Barbara Saar begins our coverage reporting from the Pentagon.
Murky new video released by the Pentagon of a U.S. Navy drone being shot down by an Iranian surface-to-air missile may be the moment that changes everything. It's hard to make out, but the smoke plume is visible as the drone falls into the waters of the Strait of Hormuz. This map showing the missile launched from the Iranian coastline more than 20 miles away from the drone, according to the Pentagon. Iran's Revolutionary Guard releasing its own video showing what it says is the moment of the shootdown. When asked about a U.S. military response, President Trump playing his cards close to the vest in the initial hours.
Iran made a big mistake.
Military commanders behind the scenes are not looking for a march to war, but they are not excusing the attack, highlighting the international nature of the Iranian threat.
This was an unprovoked attack on a U.S. surveillance asset that had not violated Iranian airspace at any time during its mission.
But Iran claims the American drone was in Iranian airspace and had its own dire warning.
We have no intention to fight with any countries, but we are completely ready for war. What happened today was an obvious sign of this accurate message.
Tensions have been rising for weeks. In early May, the Pentagon sent an aircraft carrier strike group, Patriot missile defenses, and fighter jets in the wake of intelligence the U.S. said showed Iran was planning an attack. Then, Iran is believed to have attacked commercial tankers last month and again last week, using mines to leave gaping holes, leading to another 1,000 troops being sent for further deterrence of Iran.
Thanks to Barbara Saar for that report. Joining us now, retired Air Force Colonel and CNN military analyst Cedric Leighton. Colonel, thank you for being with us. Is there any reason that you know of why the U.S. president, after deciding on a military strike like this, would make this decision to literally call back the planes and turn the ships around? What could be the circumstances surrounding that moment?
Well, John, there could be several possibilities. It's, of course, a very strange situation to deal with, and it doesn't really happen very often except in exercises and in movies sometimes, perhaps. But the big reason I think that the president may have done this was basically he wanted to do this as a show of force. So that's on the positive side of things. You know, he wanted to show the Iranians what we could do without actually doing it. So that's one possibility. The other possibility is that he could have in essence, gotten cold feet and decided that he didn't want to go that far because he became concerned after thinking about it what Iran might do in response to this action. So, the risk of ever-increasing escalation is extremely high in a situation like this, and it's certainly a possibility that he may have decided that this was not worth doing at this particular point in time.
If you're a military leader sitting back in Tehran and you're just learning about this now, did you see it as a show of force or an act of cold feet?
Well, I would, if I were in the Iranian shoes, I would see it as a show of force because it may, even if it is a set of cold feet, it could still be something that tells me that the Americans are coming in, they're doing these things, they have the capability of doing certain things. Their targets may have been command and control nodes, radar sites, things like that. And so I would certainly be very cautious at this point if I were sitting in Tehran.
Yeah, as far as that goes, the military action, the New York Times also reporting that officials said the president had initially approved attacks on a handful of Iranian targets like radar and missile batteries. it's essentially what you call a proportional response to the downing of the drone, but it may be proportional, but it's not without risk.
That's right. Yes, proportional depending on the number of batteries, missile batteries, and radar sites that you actually strike. If you strike one or two, that would be probably somewhat proportional to what happened to the Global Hawk drone. But if you strike 20, 30, 40 or more, then you risk going way beyond the rules of proportionality, and that could also create its own series of problems.
Yeah. What we have here is a little more from that New York Times report in regards to the drone. Iran's ability to target and destroy the high-altitude American drone, which was developed to evade the very surface-to-air missiles used to bring it down, and surprised many Defense Department officials who interpret it as a show of how difficult Tehran can make things for the United States as it deploys more troops and steps up surveillance in the region. For those around the president who are arguing for a robust military response, like the National Security Advisor John Bolton and others, at this point, are they underestimating just what the U.S. could be facing in terms of Iran's military capability?
I think that's a very big risk. I think it's certainly possible that they're underestimating what Iran can actually do. Now, Iran is, definitely has its vulnerabilities, has its weaknesses, but the Iranians are also very experienced fighters. They've been doing this for quite some time. They fought Iraq in the Iran-Iraq War. They fought all kinds of paramilitary actions through their proxies as well as through the Revolutionary Guards. So they're very experienced fighters, and they've also had a lot of time to develop tactics and techniques that they would not have otherwise developed had they had more peaceful or amicable relations with the United States. So the Iranians are not only a difficult foe, but a very dangerous foe. And that is something that people in the White House and throughout the corridors of power here in Washington will really have to take a look at.
We're also hearing that this military response, which had been ordered and then called off by the president, it may not be called off for good. It could actually just be postponed or put on hold. So where do you think things stand right now? Is this a pause or is this a reset?
Well, it's an opportunity for a reset. I think I'll put it this way. It's an opportunity for a reset if both Iran and the United States choose it to be that. It could, in effect be a pause, but the element of surprise is gone for the United States, at least at the moment. And that, presents its own problems as well. So when you look at exactly what the state of play is here, it's definitely fluid. It could go in many different directions, but it's definitely a very dangerous situation right now in the Persian Gulf, and it's something that I think we're going to have to watch very carefully. Probably for not just 2 days, but for the next few weeks.
Cedric Layton, CNN military analyst. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you being with us.
You bet, John. Anytime.
The U.S. Federal Aviation Authority has put restrictions on U.S. airlines flying over the Gulf region, put out a notice saying all flight operations in the overwater area of the Tehran Flight Information Region above the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman only are prohibited until further notice due to heightened military activities and increased political tensions in the region, which present an inadvertent risk to U.S. civil aviation operations and potential for miscalculation or misidentification. David Susi, a CNN safety analyst and former FAA safety inspector, is with us to explain what this all actually means. David, start with the logistics. How many flights are we talking about here will be impacted by this FAA order? And is it just a matter of those flights being rerouted away from the region, or is that just a little too simplistic?
It's a little more complicated than that because there actually has to be adjoining flights and different stops that need to be changed. But United Airlines from the United States has been doing this for a little bit. They knew that there was something going on in the area and they chose to do it. But at this point, the FAA is restricting all flights. So that could affect a lot of other carriers and where they're going. So it could be pretty significant. I don't think passengers that are traveling through the area are going to be too inconvenienced by it. It may extend the flight for an hour or two or add an additional stop.
Okay, is this one of those calls which is made even though there is low risk but a need for an abundance of caution, or does there have to be a significant threat before the FAA would actually go to this extent?
The significant threat does not need to exist to do this. All there has to be is increased military activity or proof that there's some missiles in the area or military activity in the area that could reach the altitude of the aircraft. If you remember in the Ukraine accident, MH17 back in 2014, it was a very similar situation. When that airplane was brought down, military activity was increased, but they didn't think that they had the capability. Now this is proven because of this drone that they do have the capability in the area to shoot them down. So that would have escalated the risk for the FAA.
With MH17, I think that they were flying at the recommended altitude, which, as you say, they thought was above the range of the surface-to-air missiles. Well, other airlines, though, actually flew at a high altitude. They took their own measures. Would you expect something similar in this case?
Yeah, I think that with this, what's odd about this is that the FAA is the one issuing the NOTAM. What should occur, according to the International Civil Aviation Organization rules, is Iran themselves are the ones who should be making this notice and saying, we're part of the United Nations, we really want to be part of this, and we're going to divulge when we have that capability in this area and when there's activity. So it's surprising to me that Iran hasn't stepped forward and say, we have this capability and don't fly over our area. So that's unique.
Yeah, in the past, orders to avoid airspace, in my experience, have been a prelude to escalated military action. Even though this order refers to the downing of the U.S. drone, what are the chances this decision was made in expectation of the U.S. launching a military strike, and that military strike, according to the New York Times, was abruptly called off by the president?
I most definitely think it was, and that's indicated by the fact that United Airlines, who's privy to this information, because they do fly direct, they're the only U.S. carrier that flies direct to India and over this area. So because of that, there was definitely NOTAMs that came out, and which are not public to everyone, that just says, hey, we're going to do some military action here, and so we need to stop flying in the area. That's a very big indicator that there was some activity even before this drone was shut down.
Right, and the situation now that this military action has been called off, does that mean that this advisory will eventually be withdrawn? Where does it stand?
No, I think that this advisory will stay in place for people not to fly over it, simply because it's been proven that that capability exists now. In fact, there was an air carrier within 50 miles of this drone that was shot down. That seems like quite a long ways, but when you're traveling at speeds of 300 or 400 miles an hour, 50 miles is not that far. They would have been able to see out the window the plume of smoke from this drone being shot down.
Yeah, 50 miles is a blink of an eye, really. David, thank you.
Is.
Appreciate your insights.
Yeah, thank you.